we're in a new location today, right? Picked great guys running a great local business here in Tallahassee. Every person has marker moments in their story that really define them, that define the way they view the world.
So what would you say to the person, an executive or a manager within corporate America, who's hearing you and they're thinking, yeah, but what does that have to do with my work?
We are gone from a world that was led by managers, and we're now going to a world that's going to be led by leaders. The world is completely changed now. If you don't know yourself, well, you're not going to be able to lead the workforce that's out there right now. Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It is your boy, Adrian, and I am joined by the one, the only...
the beautiful...
oh, gosh.
Breezy.
You're on one already today. It's about to be fun. How are you today, Bri?
I'm doing well today. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Bri, we're in a new location today, right?
Yes, we are.
We are. We here again. We're based here in Tallahassee, and we were... had the privilege of actually using a place that I actually like to shop. I get a lot of my sneaks from here, vintage stuff picked. Again, great guys running a great local business here in Tallahassee. And so if you're ever in the Tallahassee area, you're ever at a football game, come down to a basketball game, you're here for whatever in Tallahassee, come down, check out our guys at Picked. Again, they got so much vintage clothing and sneaks. And so it's a great look. Again, we're going to put it, Grady's going to do it in post. It's going to look amazing. Their Instagram, Picked TLH. Make sure if you go there, ask my boy Matt. Tell him that the New Rules Pod sent him. Maybe he'll hook you up. I don't know. We ain't got no deal. We ain't got a deal with him yet. So we'll just leave.
We don't got a promo code.
Yeah, we got a promo code. You know what I'm saying?
Promo code is Breezy20.
How do you get the promo code? I don't understand. So
okay,
that's
fine. It's New Rules Pod 20.
Okay, because this is what I'm starting to realize. When the pod blows up, I already am preparing for you to go solo. I already know. I already am prepared for you to go solo.
For the record, I have no idea what I would talk about for an hour.
I already know. Listen, when the pod blows up, I'm already ready. I already know you're going to try to Justin Timberlake this thing and just go solo, right? Now, the question is that, will you be Justin Timberlake or not? We don't know. You know what I'm saying?
I guess we got to blow up to find out.
We do. But hey.
Follow and listen to the New Rules Podcast.
It is. Make sure, listen, if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, again, you can actually go to mine, to Adrian Crawford. Make sure that you subscribe there. Again, all the podcasts dropping on there. Again, you get to see all the great work that our producer Grady does with all the in post and everything like that. A lot of funny stuff. So make sure that follow us again individually. Bri, what is your Instagram? We never said that. What's your Instagram, Bri?
It's Bri.N. CLRK.
All right, Bri.N. N. What's the N for?
My middle name.
What's your middle name?
Nicole.
Oh, all right.
Brianna Nicole Clark.
Brianna Nicole Clark.
Don't look me up on Facebook.
Brianna,
please.
Don't look her up on Facebook. All right. Well, Bri, we're going to, man, as we're recording this pod, last week, I've been a little bit everywhere. I've been in Louisville, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. I was in Atlanta, Georgia. And then last week, we had client work out on the best coast, the West Coast last week.
And where did we go?
Nobu. We actually did go to Nobu, and it was so good. It was definitely good. It was definitely all the hype. You know, sometimes you hear a lot of hype about a restaurant, and you know, it's our first time going there, and we actually went to Nobu, and it was definitely. I mean, it was one of those meals where it just hits at like 3 or 4 levels. Sometimes you just eat food. This one, you were I was trying to savor every moment of eating that food, and so. Nobu was phenomenal. But Bri, what was one of your favorite things actually about being out there? Because again, you know, we worked a lot, had a lot of stuff to do, but we did have some time to do some other stuff. So what was your favorite part of being out? And it's your first time actually in LA. So what did you think about it?
My favorite part, my favorite part is the work that we got to do with our clients. I can't particularly share a lot of the details of that, but that's up there for sure. I'd say just generally, I loved that there were so many coffee shops. It was like every day when we decided, you know, if we weren't in session where we were going to work, you could Google coffee shops and there'd be like 20 on the radar.
Yeah.
You could kind of figure out which one you're probably going to work in the best, the vibes you want. Like in Tallahassee, we do not have a solid coffee shop.
Dude, there's places we go, great things, right? You know, like our guys at Catalina Cafe, food's
They're
elite.
the best.
Food's elite. vibes are, vibes aren't great.
Yeah.
Red Eye Coffee, again, I got to be careful. I know all these people. Red Eye Coffee, great open space. Coffees, again, I'm going to be honest, coffee's okay. It's good. Coffee's okay. There's other places to go, but you're right. There needs to be a place where, like, when you're out there, where not only do you have great coffee, but there's just the vibe of it, where you actually sit there and you can work. And I get why why actually places don't do that a lot is because, man, like, it's not a library, right? So it's like you got to sell stuff to keep the doors open. But again, I don't know how they do it, but in LA, man, I mean, they're just, we were posted, our first one went to Hilltop, that coffee shop Hilltop, which was, if I'm not mistaken, it's owned by Issa Rae. And that was, vibes were incredible. Coffee was great. Food was great. Everything about that open space. It was kind of like somewhat like a coffee shop / like kind of like a restaurant where they had booths you could sit in, but people were just posted up working there. So that part was really cool. I thought that was good. La La Land.
Yes, La La Land.
La La Land was definitely very nice as well. So, yep, coffee shops are great. Working with clients great. Anything else about LA that you loved?
To me, LA was very underwhelming.
Oh my God! Here we go.
And Adrian likes the weather, which neither here nor there.
The weather's
the
weather's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Plus, we live in a city that's like next door to hell, and like I walk outside, I feel like somebody puts their hand over my face every time I walk out, and they're freaking like mugging me because it's so humid in this place. So yeah, to go out there and like wake up in the morning, I can like breathe. It's amazing. Yeah.
And I agree with that. I think that I was expecting, because this is my first time ever going to California, ever going to LA, Long Beach, and because of the way that it's talked about in the media, I expect it to be like New York, essentially. I love New York. So I thought it was going to have that level of like uniqueness and self-expression. I don't know why I thought that, because I know a lot of people talk about it feeling kind of fraudulent. But whenever I went there, I was walking around like, oh my gosh, this place is kind of boring.
Wow.
Like everything outside of the weather, it just felt so like gray, and everyone looks the same, talks the same, moves the same. And I thought it was going to have the level of self-expression as New York. So that's why I was disappointed, is because I was comparing it to something that ultimately shouldn't have been compared to.
Yeah.
But
well, I can see that. I can see, because in New York, I mean, it is definitely a different type of vibe. I mean, there is greater, I think, sometimes self-expression in New York, where, you'll see somebody just, walking around and, and they'll just, they'll be in the, in a Nike Tech sweatsuit. Next thing you know, somebody else is walking around with freaking leather on and like a mohawk and boots. And then, it's all type of crazy. But I would agree. I could see with the self-expression part of it. I think for me, besides the weather in LA, I just think there's to me, there's a creative vibe. I think any city, what I mean, that does that is a creative vibe. And people always say, like, man, these cities are the most creative. What I push back on those things is like, I mean, those cities are creative because the people who come there are creative. And here's the thing. So it's sometimes like, well, those are the cities where creation happens. I'm like, no, I think cities can, because there's people who've come from Tallahassee who've gone out there and who've made impact in LA or in New York. And so I think it's the people that actually make it. But when you're in that kind of environment a lot, it actually does spark a lot of creativity. And so that's the part where I actually like. So
for you, the question.
Yep.
How do you keep that momentum whenever you are somewhere like Tallahassee? Because there's a different energy, like you just said, that you get whenever you're in major cities and you're around people who have that same kind of, vibe, energy of creativity, and it gives you momentum and it's kind of refreshing.
Yeah.
So how do you keep that whenever you're essentially kind of, you're carrying that in a way here? Yeah,
I mean, because one of the things I do is that I have how I try to keep it is, it's having space. I think what makes why you have creativity there, because you're seeing different people, but getting in new environments sparks creativity, right? I think also it's the fact of having space to do that. So what I try to do is have times to, when I'm back, is to actually to create, to where where I have to force myself not to think about, oh, I've got to go here, or I could go do this. I could go, I could go get this at the store. I could go over here, because it's familiar to you. So I have to continue to create space. That's one of my things I try to do every year. That I actually got from Jim Collins, the writer of Good to Great, is I try to have 1,000 creative hours a year. And I've been doing that now for the last, just coming up on my 3rd year. And so I think when you're doing stuff like that, it actually allows you have to just create space. So to answer your questions, like you just got to create space. You got to really force yourself. I have to force myself to have time to where I'm not around. And I may go to a different environment, different coffee shop, a different place in order to get my brain to stay on that thing that we're actually working on. So. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that had nothing to do with our topic today.
No, but it's all good. Well, with that being said, guys, let's jump into the pod.
All right, Adrian, well, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, we're going to talk on a topic called liberating leadership. I know. But no, liberating leadership. And again, if I'm going to read a quote that actually sparked this for me. It's from one of my favorite books that's out there, and it's called Let Your Life Speak. And it says this: one is that it will take us inward and downward toward the hardest realities of our lives, rather than outward and upward toward abstraction, idealization, and exhortation. Why we must go in and down is because as we do, we will meet the darkness that we carry within ourselves, the ultimate source of the shadows that we project onto other people. If we don't understand that the enemy is within, we will find 1,000 ways of making someone else out there into the enemy, becoming leaders who oppress rather than liberate others. And this is by Parker J. Palmer. And what ultimately he's saying and why this quote has stuck with me and why I actually spend a lot of time now in corporations and places teaching on this is because ultimately what he's getting to is that it's if we don't understand self, we can never be those who actually help others. His whole point is leadership is to actually liberate the authentic self. It's to liberate others. But if you have never been liberated, what you will do is you will cast your shadow side will lead out of your leadership, and you will continue to oppress people instead of actually helping them, lead them, to liberate them. And as we say here, we believe the best leaders are authentic leaders who create credible cultures. And so that's why this quote has stuck with me. This book, there's so much. It's all about purpose. But then when he has so many nuggets in it that it's just kind of sparked this whole thought about liberating leadership for me.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there between the quote and everything that you said about why it's important to you. Why should somebody care? Mm-hmm. It's easy for someone to say they care about liberating themselves.
Yep.
Why should the long-term thing be to help others do that?
Because I think that's how you actually get legacy. I am very much so, I believe if you're going to lead, you should be a leader who tries to lead for legacy. And I don't mean that you're doing this from some, place of your own brokenness or whatever, trying to doing it for man, I just want, to get all these accolades and praise. But no, I think legacy means that you've lived a life that impacted people beyond you being here. Somebody who has a legacy, they talk about you when you're gone, the things maybe you left behind. And so I think that why leaders should think this way is because they should think beyond themselves, because I think your life is incredibly shallow. I think your life, I'm going to say it this way. It's pointless. It's pointless to me if you're going to live a life and all it was about you. There's no impact beyond you. I don't think that was a life well lived.
So you can't help people. You can't develop people into that if you haven't done the work yourself. So can you talk a little bit about what that means to do that work yourself?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of stuff. Again, if you've listened to the pod, we've talked a ton about the inward type of work, but kind of starting from the beginning, it's actually knowing just what actually moves you. Another thing is this, it's like knowing your story. I think one thing is do you actually know your story? Every person has a story, and every person has marker moments in their story that really define them, that define the way they view the world. And so the first thing you have to do is actually go back and see how you actually see the world and how did you get there. Because as you go on that journey, it begins to allow you to see how you actually lead now, how you actually help others, how you don't help others, what's your shadow side, why do you have a shadow side, is the shadow side that you have, how do you manage that? I mean, all those things starts by something very simple, going back with your story to do that. So for some people, that's actually writing it out. Just to start writing your story from the time you can remember, just points, markers, and you'll be amazed as you do that, what actually starts coming out of that.
So what would you say to the person who's maybe an executive or a manager within corporate America who's hearing you and they're thinking, yeah, but what does that have to do with my work?
Yeah. Because I think if you don't do it, you're dead in the water for the world that we're in now. As somebody who I've quoted before, Mark Sayers, has said that we are gone from a world that was led by managers, and we're now going to a world that's going to be led by leaders. Because when you're in a time where it's so much, it's not predictable. Leaders have to lead right now, because when you kind of can like, you pretty much can like predict what's maybe going to happen, then you can manage that. But with markets changing, not knowing, how long does the Russia-Ukraine thing go? The fact that now as we're recording this, I mean, we're a few days away from the debt ceiling. Will Congress actually come to a place of reaching that? And if they don't, there could be there's a market collapse that happens in that. There's so many things we could go on. The world is completely changed now. And so the reason why this matters is because as a leader, if you don't know yourself well, you're not going to be able to lead the workforce that's out there right now. And so this is the way of 21st century leadership. This is post-COVID leadership, is authentic leadership. And so why managers, leaders, CEOs, executives have to do this is because you cannot lead the new workforce. You cannot lead Gen Z and millennials, because they're going to hold you to a standard of actually being authentic and accountable. But then also, you need to learn that, because you need to help them be authentic. Because I think some of the things that Gen Z and millennials in the workforce think is authentic isn't authentic. It's just what they're just saying whatever they feel or whatever I think. Everything I feel is not authentically me. And so I think you have to know yourself so that you actually can healthily lead them into the world that we're heading into.
2 questions. I'll start with the first one. You talked a little bit about this. What would you say is the main difference between industrial age leadership and 21st century leadership? Yeah,
industrial age leadership was very hierarchical leadership, right? This is my manager. They it kind of just goes in the typical, if you're listening to this, is just the kind of pyramid, right? You got the CEO and it just works its way down. And what it was is that it was just leadership just by like people just dictated to you what to do, right? So this is my manager. And again, and at levels, I believe in hierarchy. I believe there should be leadership. There should be those who, you answer to, all that. So hear me in that. But now the difference, so that's how it was. What's really shifted is because of the internet. The internet's made the world like flat. Like IBM made the whole industrial, how kind of corporate America's kind of done now. But what's happened now is that the internet has made the world a lot more flatter. There's way more voices coming in, way more of a world. We've gone from, you've heard me say it, from a complicated world to a complex world. So there's so many more layers now tied to people. So, you can normally pick somebody who came from, let's say, a typical university, they went to an NYU, Stern, and they come out and they kind of just the same, right? But now that same person, that same white guy who comes out of there may be influenced by Asian hip hop culture, and then have he's, connected to some global stuff in Russia, Ukraine. You're just like, he's completely different. And there's another kid who comes out different. So the world is more complex. So in leading that, you have way more stuff going on. And so the industrial age was that way. The new, like this 21st century age, you have to inspire people. Inspiration matters. You have to dig in there. And people, so that means you have to know yourself. Inspiration is something you feel. You can't teach it. Like you can't, I'm going to give you like this rah, rah, rah type of speech that's coming. No, people feel inspired when it comes out of somewhere deep within. And I believe that's the 21st century leadership. It does not mean that you're not going to have order and things like that. But to really get people to go, you're going to really have to inspire them.
So do you think that hierarchy is still important? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a guy who's like, let's blow up all hierarchy and everybody's equal. It's not. Listen, I tell my kids all the time, fairness ended in the Garden of Eden, okay? Like, so as a Bible guy, like I just believe like fairness, like this whole thing of everybody's treated fair, like look, as a guy who's a CEO of something and I started something from the ground, yeah, here's the reality. I took all the risk. So my reward probably is going to be bigger than others. Does not mean like for you that like your reward's not going to be it's not going to be good. It's not going to be above and beyond. But will it be bigger than mine? Probably not, because I took on all the risk. I think that's where. So I'm using that example where sometimes we think, well, everybody's all equal. Yeah, I mean, like in the eyes of God, yes, everybody is equal. But some people took on things. Let me tell you this. Me and LeBron James, from a basketball standpoint, we're not equal. I mean, I saw last night. I mean, as we're recording this, the dude's freaking 38 years old, scored 40-something points. Dude, nobody's done that. Like, we're not equal. So I think that sometimes we have to come to reality, but going back to what you're saying in specifically hierarchy, I believe that's needed. Structure's needed. We're living in a world where everybody's going to tear down everything. Structure's needed. I just think hierarchy should exist for the betterment of people instead of the betterment of the organization. That's the difference. Hierarchy was just for the betterment of the organization. They would say, oh, we're for people. No, they weren't. It's for the betterment. I think hierarchy should be there for the betterment of human beings who are working within your organizations.
Can you share a little bit more in detail about like what the difference in risk and reward looks like for each of us in the different positions?
Yeah. I think that early on, so for example, let's look at this. I mean, you took a risk. You took a risk not to go to school, right, to come on and work as like my assistant. Then it's like, hey, let's start this thing. And you were like, okay, let's roll with it. You took a risk. So what does that look like for you? That looks different than anybody else who comes into our company because you were there at the beginning. You took some risk. You weren't getting paid at the level that you're paid now. You weren't getting paid, probably at the time what you were worth. But you were willing to take a risk with me to do that. And so because of that, yeah, the reward's different than somebody else who may come in. Does not mean they're not valuable. But there are times and things are different. And here's another thing. People have to understand there may be somebody who comes in who may bring a big, they bring in more clients or they bring in, you merge with the company or whatever. Or somebody they're really talented and they can take you to another level. Man, you know what? They may get more than somebody who's been there. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. So I think that's just the idea that I think risk comes to, in order to move forward, you're going to have to be willing to take a risk. I also think that risk just looks different for every person and reward looks different for every person. I think reward looks different for your talent level. You know what I mean? Like that's just life. Some people are just more talented and their reward may be more than yours. Does not mean you're not valuable. Doesn't mean your reward is not valuable. But in the eyes of society, whatever that looks like, their bank account may be more because their talent level was higher.
Mm-hmm. Part of why I asked that question is because I think, especially in this current cultural moment, people have a lot of different opinions of what CEOs and things of that nature should be getting paid versus an employee. And part of why I asked that, and I'm speaking from this, particular situation, is like you had 3 children and you started a business that could have completely flatlined.
Yeah.
It's like I was just me, like I'm not taking care of anybody else, and I decided to not go to college to be an executive assistant, which is a risk. Yeah. But that's not the same as like if this business fails right now, it goes on your credit. Yeah. Like you would be bankrupt, not me. Yeah. And so that's just some of the practical implications that a lot of the times I don't think that people really consider unless they're the one actually taking that risk. No,
and that's a good point. And I also want to speak, though, to corporate CEOs whose companies take losses and they still take bonuses.
Which is part of that is why the world went from complicated to complex. Yes. It's because everyone's a lot more aware of the dynamics of what's going on and people aren't okay with just standing with stuff anymore because of hierarchy. They're like, no, like we want to know the details. Yep. We need to understand your integrity and who you are and what's driving the decisions that you're making. Anyways, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. And I mean, because there was it was a viral clip that went out about some type of furniture company, and their CEO was this woman, and it was one of the worst, first of all, like just leadership moments I've ever seen by a human being. Like I thought her board should have fired her just for how stupid she sounded. And it was this, she gets on there and it was like, they've taken a loss and people were complaining, talking about, man, what about our bonuses? Are we going to get it? And then she just pretty much in a sense told them like quit bitching and complaining about it. What are we going to do to get these sales up? But she also took but she took her bonus. And I think her bonus was something like in the millions. And no one else got a bonus because they took a loss. That right there, that's the leadership in the 21st century that won't hold because that's not okay. I'm like a great example is that if we don't have it's crazy for me to say, I'm going to take a bonus and I say, hey, Bri, and the rest of the team, you guys aren't going to get one. I'm going to get a big bonus, but you're not going to get anything because we took a loss. That's awful leadership. That's not That's not empowering leadership. That's not servant. That's not like, servanthood leadership. That's not sacrifice at all. It's like we got to be in the trenches together. And now again, I think that's where when you hear the uproar from people, it's from there. But again, remember, all of our anxiety takes us to black and white thinking to crazy town. So what we'll do is just make it to be like, well, then we'll hear that's like a story like I just told you. And then we're like, see, that's the problem. No CEO should get bonuses or do stuff like that. I'm like, no, that's not what it means, And yeah, it's going to look different. A person running a company and they've helped build it, and let's say they increase, profits by 30%. Yeah, and they may get a big payout. They've worked their way to that point. It's just different, and I think that's where everyone has to be okay, especially in our world, because it's really hard for people to understand. It's that dichotomy of like, yes, we're all equal, but talent isn't. Mm-hmm. Skill isn't. EQ isn't. IQ isn't. That's not all equal. And I think that's the part where, again, it's complex, and we have to have the skill set to see through all those layers in order to get to somewhere.
So earlier you mentioned that all of your emotions are not who you are. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so for example, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, right? Like, and they cut you off, and all of a sudden you just had a bad day, right? At a moment, and you're just like, but you just go nuts, right?
I do that on a good day.
All right, well, you go nuts there. Well, that may be you then, but no, it's like if you have a moment to where you act out of character, or you just like, I just want to say something, all of a sudden I'm speaking my mind. Like, people think just I'm me speaking my mind. That's just me. And you're like, that's authentically me. You're like, no, that's a child. That's not authentically you. And so what I mean by that is we have to be careful with all of our feelings being who we are. Feelings many times can point to some deeper things. So, for example, I would find myself when I would get around, this was when I was a kid, I would get around people. I couldn't even, it was so hard for me to articulate, but I would be in rooms with people who may be struggling, and I would literally feel like I would all of a sudden get so sad because of what they were going. Like, I didn't even know who they were. I just would sit by them, or I'd be walking by them. I'd be in a room with them, and I would start to feel really sad. Now, in that, what those feelings were pointing to for me were pointing to this idea of empathy, like this idea of like the emotion. So instead of me saying, okay, well, I'm just, because in that moment, the feeling, oh, I'm just depressed then. No, I wasn't depressed. I was actually empathizing and feeling what that person was actually going through. So those feelings can actually take you and actually help you find out what's deeper in there. But not all the way you feel. Feelings can many times be those detectors that actually lead to the authentic self, but it doesn't mean that's authentically who you actually are.
So I would say that example, maybe some would disagree. I feel like majority could probably be convinced.
Yep.
Do you have any examples that might be a little bit more controversial?
About the idea of like what your feelings are.
Feelings not being who you are.
So here's one. People go through right now, and I'm going to be really clear before I set this go. So anybody who listens to this and they know I'm a Christian, I am a Jesus follower, I believe in Christian ethics, all the things of Christianity. So don't email or do anything like that. But I'm saying it's about sexuality, right? There may be a feeling of something different, of like what's not what society would say is norm. And all of a sudden there's an attraction, or, you start feeling some type of way. That does not mean, that feeling does not mean all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, man, I'm, and today what people do is like, yep, I'm same-sex attracted, I'm bisexual, I'm whatever, by just a feeling. They just had a feeling. It was a moment. And that doesn't mean that's who you are. And so that's a controversial one, but a lot of times, like, people are just like, or here's one, like, people will say, oh, I'm a different gender trapped in a different gender's body. And then you have parents who are going out there right now and like letting people have, in like life altering surgeries without really processing what all does this mean. for you to do that and what that looks like, especially for somebody like a child. So that's a controversial one. I know a lot of people may not agree with that, but that's something where I'm like, if you're going to, that's where doing things just only on how you feel without really, and I'm not saying that people haven't processed this through, but I've also seen where I've seen it where people have not processed through and have changed a lot of stuff in their life. And I've seen the other side of it, to where they come back and they just regret certain decisions because it was just a feeling. I just felt this way. Or people, man, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people like leave places where they're flourishing and leave because, man, I felt like this is the right way to go. And you see this a lot, Bri. We see this in Christian world, church world all the time. People just pull the God card out like it's, it's most disrespectful. Well, I feel like God said this. I'm like, really? Because like last week, God said, I felt like this. So who's schizophrenic? Either you or God. I'm going to go with you, not him, right? And people like go places, man, and really like disrupt and really have real struggles in their life because they just went on a feeling. And again, feelings are good. I mean, feelings lead to stuff, but you got to really process what that really speaks to.
So your comment about sexuality can be especially controversial because you do diversity, equity, inclusion work in the corporate world and, that kind of thing, saying the elephant in the room.
Yep.
If you're comfortable, would you mind explaining a little bit more about your approach?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. So
as a Christian.
Yeah. So what I tell people is this: I have my own personal views that shape the way I view the world. I have my views of what I believe the Bible teaches about sex, sexuality, whatever the topics are. But when I'm working in a company, if someone is, gay, bisexual, transgender, whatever, like that, there should be nothing that hinders them from being able to move up in an organization or work in an organization, because your sexuality doesn't stop you from being good at at finance or at sales or in supply chain management. It doesn't. So for me, I go in to make this a place that's better for all people to actually work their way through. And some Christians have issue with that because they think that I am now, I am pushing a lifestyle that goes anti the Bible. And by me I'm not pushing a lifestyle. I'm actually coming in and helping an organization to allow all people to be able to work there. Now, if you sit there and have a conversation with me personally, I'm going to tell you what I actually truly believe, what the Bible actually teaches. And so, but here's why this is so important, is because I can let the anxiety of society and culture or the anxiety of clients or whatever lead me. And I'm not going to let that do that, because the work that I do, the work speaks for itself. That's why I always tell people, look at the work. You can think whatever you hear me say, but then look at the work. And what people can tell you is the work is always where it is very much so that we help build cultures that are diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures for all types of people. And so that's how I walk through this worldview. And so sometimes it pisses people off. Sometimes people don't understand it. Sometimes people question it. But in the end, I tell people, I will not have to give an account. You won't have to give an account for my life. I believe what the Bible. I will give an account at the end of my life for my life, and that's what I have to do. And I have the right type of people around me that really challenge me. So that's kind of how I approach it. And some people like it, but some people don't. And some companies may not like to work with me because they allow their anxiety. They become experts of me. So I can say this, but what they'll say, well, no. But because I am a Christian, then you're going to then treat it like this, versus actually seeing the work. And what you're doing that moment, you're allowing your anxiety to not be an expert of me. And so if you're going to be an expert of me, then we never can get anywhere, because I have to be an expert of myself.
Mm-hmm. So whenever it comes to people having anxiety around their worldviews, when you really play that out, that's what you find out, that people really want to have companies that exist and align with exactly what their worldview is. Mm-hmm. And so practically that might look like an all-Christian organization. Mm-hmm. It might look like an all-women organization, which is totally okay. It really is about why you're doing it. Yep. You, for the most part, have a core belief that people should, all different sorts of people with all different sorts of worldviews, should be able to show up in the same workplace and exist together because they know who they are, and they know where they end and somebody else begins. And because of that, they know how to do really good conflict resolution. Do you have anything else you'd like to share along that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you laid out 3 really good points into what we do. Here's what I'll say, because I live in both worlds. I'm a pastor, and I work in corporate America. The problem with the church, my good friend Adrian and Bri says it this way. The problem with the church is that the church many times want organizations and they want the government to make certain things to be like unthinkable. So let's think about like abortion. What we do in the church, we want the government to make that to be unthinkable. Instead of it should be the church that makes that unthinkable because of how we love, care, and we generally preach very clear the Bible. But many times the church is abdicated, not all. So I want to be clear because every time we just blanket statement the church. But there are a lot of churches that just, they want the government or corporations to do their job versus like doing your job and being who you need to be. And on the other side of that, and so I think that that's where I know that when we're working, when we're building within an organization, it is to be in the best place for everybody to work there. Because I know if like there's some companies, they're never going to hire someone who was trans. There may be some company who may never hire somebody who's a devout Christian. That's their choice to not do that at all. But in that, those companies that are like, we have all these different types of people, we then build cultures that go around to make it be the absolute best for them to flourish, no matter where you find yourself.
Mm-hmm. I feel like some of the point is, especially in this culture where people want just everything to be a choice, like everything's my right, everything's my choice. It's like, then you have to be okay with somebody else wanting something to be their choice as well. So if individuals want an organization to look a certain way, you either need to be okay with working at a company who might not 100% align with your values, find one, or create your own. That's really all you can do.
No, it is. And I think that this is the problem in our country today is that everybody talks about freedom. But like, do you really want everybody wants everybody to have freedom if their freedom is there, if they believe the same thing you believe. But having freedom means everybody has freedom. And I may disagree with a choice or a decision that somebody makes. I think could be, maybe I think it's harmful, whatever. But that's the reality of living in a nation, that you have like freedom. But what we deal with today is that, you'll see like maybe on the political left, it's like, oh man, it's the freedom of choice with your body, right? But then when you really dig down, sometimes people want the same, but they don't want you to have like a different ideology. On the other side, it's like, man, freedom with like, freedom with guns and freedom with don't touch my money and all this. But then, same way, but I want you to think a certain way about, body, environment, whatever the thing is. And I think this is just where we've gotten to where anxiety just starts to tear away the fabric of stuff. And so when we step into places, I'm really just trying to be a non-anxious presence. I do not hide when I walk into a place that I'm a black man who is a Christian, who also believes in fighting for justice, who also is an entrepreneur, do all these things. And here's the thing. I hope it confuses people. I hope they have no idea what side I'm on. I want sometime for them to hear me be like, oh my God, I think this dude's a liberal. Sometimes they're going to hear me like, oh man, I think this dude's conservative. I think I should live in that tension right there. And that is the thing. And for people who are willing to embrace that and walk through it, we actually help them get better. Those who don't, man, they may have to find somebody else to do it, but I can't talk about building authentic culture if I myself hide parts of who I am because of the worry of what you may think and what you may project on me.
Mm-hmm. So when you work somewhere or maybe just in relationships and people might cast judgment on you based off of some assumptions or things that they've seen about you, you don't really get the luxury of responding in the way that you may want to, specifically because your job is to teach people how to manage situations like that correctly. Yeah. Have you ever been in a situation like that? And whenever you are, practically, what do you do within yourself? Yeah,
so when you're in a moment, I think it's being very in tune to like, first of all, I try to be really in tune into the moment of why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. Because sometimes my response does need to be spicy to actually like wake people up. So, but I need to make sure I'm not being spicy just because I know I got that chip in me just to be an a-hole to people. And so I've got to make sure that I'm not doing that just to be that. But when I am doing this, if I'm going to be spicy, it's because it's to really shock you. It's to get your attention. Other moments, it's to say, okay, where are they coming from? And try to put myself in their shoes and have empathy for them. so that when I'm talking, I may still speak. I'm not going to water down truth, but it will feel softer because I'm actually in their shoes. So if I had their worldview, their perspective, if I was allowing anxiety to lead me, I probably would view this the same way. So then I'm trying to think about, how do I unravel that person? How do I talk them through? So as I'm talking to people many times, I already know their greatest fear, and so I'm just unraveling their greatest fear as I'm talking. I'm getting them to the basement before they even know I'm getting them to the basement. And so that's kind of how I walk them through. But I think you have to be really in tune with yourself. So that's a moment where, so say you're not in the case we're in as consultants, but say you're working, and all of a sudden someone says something and there's a disagreement, and this person has this view of you, whatever. What do you have to do? You have to just learn. You have to be really in tune. Why am I feeling this way? Do I feel insecure? Here's the other thing. The thing they say about me, like, am I secure that isn't me? Sometimes people may say, well, you're, whatever. Like, they could say you're a bigot or whatever because, you have this Christian fundamentalism, whatever. Well, I've got to make sure in myself that I'm not sitting there thinking about, well, really, am I that? Maybe I am. No, I've got to, that's why you have to be so in tune in self as you go forth and you respond.
Mm-hmm. This might seem like it's really off topic, but how it ties back to liberating leadership, at least to me while you're talking, is that this is a practical example of what we're saying all leaders have to start learning how to do.
Yes.
Like learning how to address the things within themselves so that they're able to have proactive and actual meaningful conversations with the people that they're leading, even when they think differently than they do. Yeah,
because you were spot on. It's if you don't know what's actually happening, then you're still going to lead so much out of your shadow side. And you think you're leading out of this good leadership. That's been the problem in a lot of leadership. People have performed as leaders. They've read 21 Irrefutable Laws by John Maxwell. They read Good to Great or whatever book. And again, I love both Jim Collins and John Maxwell. But what people will do is take their principles and perform. Oh, well, in this moment as a manager, I should be a collaborator. Okay, knowing deep inside they're never going to collaborate. If they're really honest, they're never going to collaborate on this thing. But they're going to bring the whole team in, spend a whole offsite day to them to do whatever the hell they want to do. That's the problem, and where they don't know what's actually going on within them. And what I mean by that is that, why aren't you collaborating? Maybe for them, they feel fear. There's a fear that, man, if I collaborate, their idea is better than my idea, will they move up? Or sometimes people are so insecure to where they use their position to just oppress people because of their insecurities. Or here's another one. Because sometimes you see a super talented person come up. I see this a lot. A talented person start moving up the ranks. There's somebody older who will start pushing them down because like, well, no, you need to go through what I went through. And then sometimes you got to realize, homeboy, he's just way more talented than you were. And you can't do that. Like, it's wrong for you to now you're the one to teach them a lesson. Mm-hmm. Who told you that you were Mr. Miyagi to them? They, you know what I'm saying? Like Daniel, Karate Kid chose Mr. Miyagi. You're just choosing to go do this to him. And I think that's the part that I see a lot where I see older dudes, I'm just going to say this. I see older 50-year-old white men in corporate America who just now, they're 10 years away from floating off into retirement, just literally run such absolutely shitty organizations and terrible things, and they hinder young, talented people from coming up because they're just trying to float. They're insecure, and they're trying to teach people a lesson, and it's wrong. It's completely wrong, and that's why some companies are actually not profitable. They're not making money. They're not being innovative because all of their talent is leaving, or all their talent is oppressed because you have these guys who are just sitting here waiting to float to retirement. One of the best, does it sound crazy? One of the best things that actually could happen in corporate America is more of a shakeup within higher levels of firings and kind of layoffs, and they should do it. And I'm telling you this, at a lot of companies in middle management, because you've got people in there who've gotten lazy. And that's the thing, that they've gotten lazy, they've gotten stuck, they don't want to move anywhere. And here's the thing, and it's all about and here it goes back to liberating leadership. Their thing of they're trying to get to their safety net, don't want to screw it up. So that thing right there is hindering growth versus what you got to do. And that's a manager versus, remember, the world that we're in right now, it's got to be led by leaders. Bri, let me get real quick, because I know I go these moments you throw a bunch of questions at me. Give me your feedback, your thoughts from just today's episode as we come to a close.
I'd say, as I'm looking back on this episode, that there are some moments that I'm very proud of, because even though we come on here every week and we talk about authenticity, we talk about it because we understand the struggle and the kind of resilience that it takes to be self-aware and just still be yourself despite everything that may be showing up for you every day.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there are a few aspects of this episode where you were just really honest. Like you were just really yourself and really honest about what you're thinking and how you're feeling. And so every time that happens, I just feel really proud.
Nice. I appreciate that. And it is. It's because there's a lot that's at you could risk. Somebody could hear this, take this podcast, let one of our clients listen to it, and they may have an issue with it, with some of my thoughts. But at the end of the day, what I have to trust in is the fact that, like, getting into this business, we got into this business to try to see real change happen. We didn't get into this business to just placate, just to get a paycheck. And so I'm like, and what we thought would help us is authentically being who we are. And so that's going to be good for some it's not. We always say your vision should attract or repel people. And so that's kind of process. So just trying to be more and more, because again, I don't want to be on a podcast or talk so much about being authentic and then constantly not being authentic. And I don't think there's been times where I haven't been, but I tell people you're always pulling those layers back. I've been at this for a while, and I started to realize I'm still always pulling layers back to being authentic. So, well, hey guys, until next time, keep writing new rules.